Let's bring in Chris Mack, who joins us on short notice from Odyssey Pittsburgh and BetMGM. He's been on the show before. Fantastic here on the Fan Cam, Twitch, and YouTube. Good morning, Chris. Your immediate reaction to the deal?
Not a win-now move by the Steelers, right? This is a team that thinks they're in contention every single year, Sean. It's the way they do business. It's why they sit here and try to outweight Aaron Rodgers all summer long, because they think they can win now, and this is not a win now move. It's interesting to me if a third round pick and some late round pick swaps were the sweetening of the pot that some people have talked about in regards to these trade conversations that cooled off during the draft and then picked back up post draft. It just does not jive with how the Steelers have done business with Omar Khan as their GM over the last 3 years and how they've looked at this season and every season really for the last, 50. They consider themselves contenders every single year, whether their roster says so or not, and this is not a win-now move. That's what jumps out to me about it. Tells me that perhaps there's another move in the waiting, or perhaps that they've got some kind of indication about what that quarterback situation may look like going forward, and that it may not be a win-now situation.
What did you think the compensation would or should be?
So leading up to the draft, Sean, we talked a lot here in Pittsburgh about if you can get back into the second round by trading George Pickens, that might be a conversation starter. And that's what a lot of people thought. Hey, let's get back into the second round because they traded the 2025 second round pick for DK Metcalf. But then the issue came up again. Okay, well, now you're right back where you started in a wide receiver room that for the last several years has been a good wide receiver one, and then just a bunch of dudes. And now you're back in that same situation where it's DK Metcalf and just a bunch of dudes. Calvin Austin III is second on the depth chart. Roman Wilson, who they drafted a year ago out of Michigan, but never really played at all. And then just a bunch of depth pieces. They signed Robert Woods a couple weeks ago. He's 33. So that's the interesting part here is that even if they had been able to acquire that second round pick that a lot of people thought Pickens would be able to get them, it still leaves you in the lurch of not having any depth really at all in your wide receiver room. Granted, I know it's an Arthur Smith offense, which would rather have 13 tight ends on the field at one time than any wide receivers. But still, if you're really going to bring Aaron Rodgers in for one roll of the dice, you better have some targets for him to throw to, and they're right back where they started in that wide receiver room.
Chris Mack, Pittsburgh, reacting to the George Pickens breaking news here on The Fan. Is he a 1, Chris?
Pickens, no. He's a very strong 2. He's going to create some mismatch nightmares. Finally, somebody to draw some coverage away from CD. That's going to be a huge benefit of this. And one of the things we talked about here in Pittsburgh over the last couple of months since DK was acquired was, man, imagine being a defensive coordinator or a safety or anybody in the secondary facing Metcalf on one side of the field and Pickens on the other, and they both go up the rail, up the red line, and now you're left saying, what do we do in the middle, which the Steelers have failed to exploit for several years in a row now. The middle is wide open, and you do have a quality tight end in Pat Freiermuth, who you paid some money to a couple years ago. All of these weapons now help feed off of each other. They don't have that anymore. The Cowboys do. They have the ability to really test secondaries now, really push safeties into poor decisions, and I'll be interested to see how Brian Schottenheimer schemes this up. But the other side of the coin is George Pickens comes from Mike Tomlin, a guy who knows how to manage these personalities really well. He made Antonio Brown manageable for half a decade, for God's sake. How does Schotty handle George Pickens the first time he walks to the sideline and spikes his helmet off the ground because CD had 5 catches for 4 first downs and a 12-yard TD in the first quarter, and George hasn't caught more than a ball or 2 yet? That's going to be something that's interesting to watch.
Chris, you mentioned they're always in win now, and Tomlin is, I mean, in most NFL cities, he's probably on the hot seat, but Pittsburgh's a little bit different. What is his relationship with Tomlin? Did that get sideways, and that was playing into this?
So I'd be curious to know how it went this offseason between those two. For what it's worth, there's plenty of Steelers fans, RJ, that have Mike Tomlin on a hot seat every year, that he doesn't get to at least a conference championship game. The national media and many folks here in Pittsburgh, like Mike Tomlin, right? They like what he's done in seemingly taking below average rosters some years and still getting to the playoffs, or at least 9 wins every year. But there are plenty of Steelers fans that don't like the job Tomlin has done. I will say that belies the point that, again, he handles personalities like this well. He just said in one of the final few post-game conferences back in December and January, George needs to grow up, because George had gotten in a fight at the end of the Thursday night game in Cleveland in the end zone. George had taken multiple flags in a game against the Bengals. George had shown up late for the Christmas Day game. George has immaturity issues. We all know that. That's no secret. And Mike Tomlin handled him well. We just talked to Pat Fryermuth on our podcast, Cabali and Mack. Mark's been covering Mark Cabali, the Steelers, for a quarter century now. We just talked to Pat Fryermuth a couple weeks ago, and Pat was insistent that George was in a great mood this offseason, that they had talked. Everybody was in good spirits about the idea of adding DK, and everybody sort of feeding off of one another. Something happened in the last few weeks. Again, whether that was the sweetening of the pot by the Cowboys in offering more than they had earlier, or maybe George Pickens finally got tired of wondering who his quarterback was going to be and popped off to Mike Tomlin and said, hey, I want out. Get me somewhere where I can catch plenty of footballs from a quarterback that I trust. I don't know. I think more than likely the Steelers had been exploring Pickens trade options most of the offseason and finally got to a point where they were comfortable doing it given the compensation, which, real quick, I'll add this, another pick for next year's draft. They're going to have multiple compensatory picks due to the signings of Fields and Wilson and other players elsewhere, Dan Moore Jr. They have loaded up on draft picks for next year's draft, guys, which is in Pittsburgh, which will have some better quarterback prospects. So they got a ton of draft capital next year that, at the very least, bare minimum, gets them in front of the hometown fans for 9 or 10 picks next year in the draft in downtown Pittsburgh, but might provide them the opportunity to trade up in early rounds and maybe take that quarterback that they believe might be able to push them forward if Rodgers doesn't come around, if Rudolph doesn't, provide more of a stopgap, if Will Howard doesn't develop this year, all of those things that are still in question in the Steelers quarterback room.
Chris Mack joining us here on 105 through the Fan with reaction to the George Pickens trade to the Cowboys this morning. Chris, on a scale of 1 to 10, if 1 is Art Monk and 10 is, Antonio Brown, how much of a locker room or culture problem did you feel like George Pickens was in Pittsburgh?
An 8. He was never as crazy as AB. He would much rather quietly stew and then let you know how he felt by putting always effing open on his eye black and getting fined for it. That's the way George is. He got to the point where he didn't really trust the media, so he would be forced to get in front of the media in the locker room every week and talk to them, and would answer questions in a way that was either combative or very terse. Didn't really want to talk, had no interest in speaking to the media. But again, according to most of his teammates, was just your typical wide receiver. Competitive, wants to get the ball a lot because he thinks it's the best way to help the team win. And in a lot of cases, given the other pieces on the Steelers offense, he was the best way for them to win. But that attitude got in the way sometimes. All the issues I mentioned last year, from showing up late to a game to the eye black and the fine and everything else. I think the Steelers finally looked at it too and said, hey, there's 1 year left on the deal, and we just paid DK Metcalf a boatload of money. We're not committing that much money to the wide receiver position. George is not going to be around after this year. Let's get something for him now.
Chris, so what kind of money was he looking at in this offseason coming up?
He's going to want wide receiver 1 money because he's been treated like a number 1 wide receiver for the last couple of years. Maybe his eyes are opened once he's in Dallas. David Mulligetta is his agent, same agent as Micah. We'll see if Jerry is refreshed his memory about, David Mulligetta. Yeah, I know who Micah's agent is now. When he comes knocking on Jerry's door or texting Jerry and saying, hey, George wants paid. I think this is a good opportunity for the Cowboys to use George either as a rental or see if he actually does show some great maturity over the next year. And if he does, maybe you decide you're willing to shell out some cash and really overcommit for the top, 3% of your roster. But I think more than likely, George comes in, like I said, helps just absolutely decimate coverages with CeeDee on the other side of the field. I think we all, the entire football watching world, sees that George is just a very strong number two. And then he goes out and gets paid like a very strong number two somewhere that might be willing to go a little over that number and get him something approaching number one wide receiver money. But I doubt it's in Dallas. I mean, he's going to have a moment this year, guys, where he sees CeeDee get the ball, get 8-9 catches on 11 or 12 targets and doesn't like it because he's George Bleeping Pickens and he should be getting the ball.
So, Chris, there's no high percentage of this that he's misunderstood.
No. No. I think the Steelers tried to hold out hope that he was. Again, it's your typical wide receiver mentality.
Yeah.
He thinks he's the best thing for the offense because he believes in himself as most really good or great wide receivers do. So he believes he should get the ball more and have somebody capable of getting him that ball more often. When he gets the ball more often and gets it in advantageous positions, he's a happy guy just like any other wide receiver. When he doesn't, the helmet gets spiked on the sidelines. He gets mad. He gets in a fight. He draws a flag. He tries to suplex someone at the end of a play. I mean, all the nonsense, the eye black I mentioned. He's one of those kind of wide receivers.